We'll get started here. First thing I want to do is I want to review the test a little bit. So I want to go back to, obviously it's been a couple weeks back, but I'm going to run through the test questions and I'll look down in the chat window and see if anybody's got any questions. The first one was on productivity. Fairly simple. You just do the math there. The Foundry, same type of thing. 20 covers, 8-hour shift. On that one, we made a slight change, but anyway, this was the original test before we fixed it. Just a second. Okay, the trends in operations management. All the above were current trends. Past half a century, as you know, number of people employed in manufacturing has gone down primarily due to automation, but the output is way up. Management plays a role, but again, I'd argue primarily automation. Productivity tends to be more difficult to automate in the service sector because the work is often difficult to automate. Multinational organizations, again, a lot of times they'll go overseas for a variety of reasons, but anyway, the primary thing, initially at least, is the low wage scales. And then the others, in terms of taxes, tariffs. Unfortunately, we're actually seeing that happen here, as the United States ends up being one of the higher tax regions. Which of the following does not represent a reason for globalizing? So, reduced responsiveness obviously is the one that does not represent. Gantt charts, they're quick and easy, but not as useful as an actual flow chart. It's kind of hard to derive the sequential nature. You just have to kind of infer it for how it's driven. So obviously a PERT or CPM is a little bit better. Slack, again, slack never exists on the critical path, and it's the amount of time that something can be delayed without delaying the entire project, obviously. Shortest path, the shortest amount of time. So if it says, if the critical path ends up being 8 weeks, yeah, that will be the shortest. Whoops, I'm sorry. Shortest path. See, again, that's the one that kind of bites you if you don't read it all the way through. But anyway, the shortest path through the network is the critical path. They're saying that's false because if you there is no slack time on that path. The way this thing is worded would be the longest path. How do you do it? Again, identify the critical path. You need to refer to the attachment for this one. I didn't see too many folks missing this one. I think people have kind of got the idea on how this works. Project can be completed 1 week early because obviously it had to be on the critical path. Takes an extra 4 weeks. Some portion of that was on the critical path. Demand cycles for individual products. Yep, driven by the product life cycle. Time series. Use the naive approach. So naive approach is something you would use if you've got a brand new product or fairly new. You've only had it for a short time. You don't have much of a track record. The only data you really have to go with is the previous months. You could go with that period. So if it's a very volatile type product, you wouldn't want to No, we're not going to just go through the exam. We're going to go through everything today. We've got lecture afterwards. I'm going to be done with this exam review here within about 5 more minutes. Salesforce Composite relies on the salesperson's estimate. So again, make sure that data is valid, that there's not some sort of incentive going on that would perhaps cause a salesperson to either over or underestimate. That might be a source of error. following best example of competing in low-cost leadership. So less raw material waste than its competitors. So again, companies will talk about going green, which is a great thing, but a company that is not green, that has a lot of waste, that waste is usually, typically, product that is being squandered. So we talked a little about the Disney forecast and just good forecasting in general. You need a good model. You need a model that's going to capture quite a bit of data, but the data that it captures needs to be relevant. I mean, there needs to be some correlation between those factors and what's actually going on. So you may find a larger factor that may seem unrelated, but if there's some sort of correlation that you've found, it can be quite useful. So John's House of Pancakes. So again, a bit of math involved there, but everybody, I think, figured that one out just fine. So I'm just going to keep blowing through these unless I see some people with questions. Naive forecast would be equal to the sales in August. That is true. It's never equal to the forecast. The forecast would make that false. Which is following is true regarding computer-aided design. Use of computers to interactively design and prepare. It's, can go beyond this too. CAD is very infrequently just used alone. Now it's usually part of a CAD-CAM system where you go directly into manufacturing. Maturity stage, product life cycle. Okay, so this is a product that you pretty much have ridden this out. To put a whole bunch more money into this product would not be useful at this time. There's not a lot you can do once a product is in the maturity stage. You're probably better off developing a new product or making some more drastic changes. Quality as a concept, yep. Nothing really new to quality. Again, there's a lot of things that are enabled by technology, and that's why if you look back at how companies were doing something, it seems like kind of a foolish process. They were probably limited by technology. Now that better technology, better communications are available, they should move on. Quality function deployment refers to deferring what will satisfy the customer. So again, the essence of any quality is customer focused. Computer-aided design, right. So the deal with computer-aided design, CAD-CAM, going into the manufacturing bit too. Like I say, draftsmen, model makers, those type of folks, the sculptors, they're going to find a tough road in terms of commercial applications because it's just so much quicker and easier to do it all digitally. Quality is mostly business, the business of quality control and staff, not ordinary employees. Obviously, it goes throughout the organization. Everybody within the organization needs to have that sort of focus. One of the ways just-in-time influences quality is by reducing inventory bad qualities exposed. So again, if you're filling a warehouse full of defective products, you may have some problems 6 months or a year down the way when you start unpacking that warehouse. So that's why using just-in-time, you're much more on top of it. The other thing about just-in-time is that if one of the other tenets of quality is continuous improvement. So as soon as new changes are made, you can incorporate those and not have to worry about utilizing the old stock. Six Sigma, so it means 6 standard deviations, or 3.4 defects per million. So very low defect rate, but it also just in general, refers to employing quality practices that will lead to that sort of low defect rate. We talked about natural variations. So natural variations again, we talk about assignable causes and the rest of that. This natural variations are determined to be unassignable, but like I said, they're more economic or uneconomical to determine the actual cause, and it's not. If it doesn't detract in terms of quality from the final product, in the eyes of the customer, then usually let it go. So assignable causes, cause of variation that can be identified. So in terms of magnitude, again, they're a little bit more problematic. They're causing defects at this point, and you need to investigate. Poka-yoke are devices that only fit together one way. So again, you want to, you don't want to, necessarily think ill of your employees, but you want to make it as easy as possible. Even the employee that's having a bad day can still put the product together correctly. So a lot of that falls back to engineering. If it's engineered so it only goes together one way, well, then you've incorporated Poka-yoke, and your defect rate will be relatively low. Successful TQM incorporates all the following except centralized decision making or centralized authority. Again, empowered employees, delegating to the lowest possible level. Those are tenets of quality. Statistical process control charts. So you've seen those. You know how it works, upper and lower limits. And it basically sends a signal so you know that the process is out of control and is generating defects. Samples taken is outside of the control limits, the process is out of control. Product life cycle, 4 stages. So introduction, growth, maturity, decline. So again, that previous question was about the maturity phase. And by the maturity phase, it's time to start exercising some cost control. You'll probably have some competitors in the market by this point too, but you've got a couple things going for you. Number one, you've already recovered your development costs, hopefully, and so you might be able to even lower the price, or at least work on a better margin than your competitor. So now you're talking about cost control and really moving on to the next big thing. International operations strategy uses export and import licensing. That'd be the international strategy. And then which of the following OM decisions pertains to sensible location of processes in relation to one another? So layout design, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, part of the lecture, and which of the following is not a qualitative forecasting. So moving average is strictly quantitative, just deals with numbers, so that's quantitative. And then the one about moving averages. If you end up with, say, 20 periods, 20 months that you're looking at various data from, and you had just a recent big month, it's going to get lost. It's going to get weighted down by all that extra data. So that's the responsiveness to change. All right, now moving on. We've got to load these slides. There's really no other way to do it. But I'll talk a little about the videos that we've got for tonight. There's a couple in there. We'll be able to see them here in a sec, or they're up on Blackboard. But you've got a couple that are from an Australian university that deal with some of the psychological factors in supermarkets. And even though the supermarkets are completely different, I mean, they're more of a European-style supermarket, much smaller aisles and the rest of that. And another thing, too, you'll probably notice is eggs. They don't refrigerate eggs overseas. They didn't do it in Europe either, nor Spain and Italy, where they have even a warmer climate. So kind of odd, but obviously it's safe. Then there's the FedEx one. Yeah, I take no credit for that music. It's kind of weird, but anyway, it is pretty interesting to see how the FedEx airplanes kind of come and go. And then lastly, there's the Hard Rock one, and the Hard Rock, it's Now, again, the lessons you can derive from Hard Rock, in terms of a business corporation, I would not say they're the greatest model, but they're certainly free to offer up the data and give you some insight into how they operate. But in terms of international locations and domestic locations, it's interesting to see how they tend to franchise the overseas locations so that they do have more of a local flair to them. Okay, so the slides are loaded up now. We'll go ahead and start talking about this stuff. So the FedEx issue, it's pretty smart the way these guys operate. One thing is, you look at where a company like FedEx could be based, potential operations, and obviously, somewhere in the center of the nation is pretty good. Probably actually favoring the East Coast because there's a little greater population density on that side. But the other thing about it is, let's say you chose a city like Atlanta. Atlanta, at least when FedEx was coming into its prime, chose their location, it was booming a bit. And you may not very well find the ramp space or the airspace to work that out, in a congested environment. Also, folks in Atlanta, if the economy's strong, they're probably going to be less willing to allow huge amounts of air traffic every night in the middle of the night. But Memphis is it's a great town, but it's kind of hurting in terms of economics, or at least it was, and it still is. Anyway, so FedEx was able to make some pretty good deals there. Was able to fly, are able to fly aircraft in there in the middle of the night, and because they're such a big economic player, they're able to do so with a fair amount of cooperation. So that video, if you watch it, the aircraft all take off. Well, I guess initially they're showing them coming into Memphis, and once they get on the ground, packages going from one destination are obviously switched to the other aircraft. So there really is no warehouse there. It's just a distribution facility. They're just switching boxes around and getting them out on their way. So we'll talk about another concept a little later in regards to trucking, and that's called cross-docking, and it's very similar. It relies on a lot of information in terms of automation, and you have to have some sort of barcode type system or RFID or whatever. You have to basically know what's coming in on the airplane before it gets there, so you can sort it expeditiously and get things rolling on. So most of these videos are there. I didn't put the Memphis one is probably a little too detailed. The aircraft hub is interesting, and then the package over the fence, that's just kind of a equal time thing, so I don't look like a FedEx spokesman. Objective location strategy is maximize the benefit of location of the firm. And the big thing about location decisions, though, you don't do these things often. The human element, the HR part of any business is tough, that human capital. And if you make a decision to relocate overseas or even relocate, say, from the Northeast down to the South, you may lose, some of your key employees. They may have commitments, may not want to move, and especially now, when you've got two-income families, you're really asking two careers to swap. So anyway, it's not a decision to be taken lightly. Fixed and variable costs are going to change significantly just because they vary by the area. And then once you make it, again, it all gets back to being a long-term decision. This map here is kind of confusing because they're making it look like, just North America. But really what we're talking about, at least the issues they're addressing, are more international, political risks. The difference between Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. especially are not that great. There's already so much trade going back and forth that things are fairly normalized. But you start going to Asia or the Middle East, and things are completely different. So anyway, a lot of things change. I did a fair number of years in Turkey and did a fair amount of business taking stuff across Turkey and then also into Afghanistan, and buying and selling huge amounts of commodities and doing business in that part of the world. Granted, there was either a war on or whatever, but there's pretty much always been a war on in that part of the world. Anyway, it makes things much more difficult, so it would affect. In terms of manufacturing, though, you're saying, well, who would manufacture stuff in the Middle East? And you'd be surprised. Turkey is a pretty big player, especially in textiles and some other niche type things. Anyway, now looking, more at a national scale, corporate desires, attractiveness of the region, labor costs, the rest of that, environmental regulations, raw materials, and construction costs. So the Northeast became industrialized due to having, favorable factors. Maybe those things have changed, at least in terms of some of the labor availability and costs, the taxes, and some of the other things. In the South, for example, you go down to Alabama, Georgia, Texas too, and you've got, if you're a manufacturer, some of the incentives that are provided. And then once the companies actually get there, just the ease of doing business is makes it pretty favorable. Also, the fact that you can pay employees a fair wage, but they can have a pretty good lifestyle just based upon the low cost of living. That has caused a pretty big shift away from the Northeast. Proximity and raw materials. As logistics have improved, and some of the materials we're talking about, steel, iron ore, things like that they aren't produced in the U.S. anymore anyway, so they're coming into a port. So plenty of ports in the South and in some of these other regions. So things change, and right now they don't favor the Northeast. Now, when you start getting down into a region, now you're talking more transportation and logistics type focused requirements, zoning restrictions to a certain extent, proximity, environmental impact, or environmental tolerance. If you're trying to do heavy manufacturing in a area that's already has some issues, it's going to be pretty tough for you. Sometimes some of the legacy costs involved with retrofitting some of those old plants to get them up to current standards, they're better off just starting from scratch. So there's not a lot of attractiveness to keeping the old facilities. Air, rail, highway, waterway systems. Again, those are huge factors because it relates to your ability to get the product around. Again, wide open spaces, though, do allow you to move product quite quickly as compared to a congested area. Clustering of companies. This is a concept. There's actually a question on one of the homeworks. In regards to the homeworks, I've had quite a few people now asked to get the homework in advance, and also there's always been this confusion about how, when do you turn in the homework? People thinking that I'm not going to allow them to turn in the homework, just prior to the test, and that has always been the case. And I think you realize that. But anyway, what I've done is I've put all of the homework out there that's due between now and the next exam into like a single assignment. So at the end of this slideshow, you'll see that slide. You'll also see it in announcements, and you also see it in assignments. So I'm trying to eliminate that confusion. And you won't have to hand in multiple submissions. It'll be one large submission, so that'll help. But anyway, the way this relates to clustering is one of the questions on the discussion questions is the notion of clustering, what it's about. So clustering works for a number of reasons. It's a strategy. Some companies want to cluster, other companies do not. So you see it in your own lives. If you look at fast food companies, often if there's one there's a few, and looking at like the Disney example, and theme parks in Orlando. Again, Orlando's kind of out of the way. Most people fly in that location. They're not just going to fly there for a day or two. So if you also have a theme park, even though it's a direct competitor of Disney, you're probably well off putting it right there in Orlando to take advantage of those people who are going to be there for a few days. It can be used by service firms and also by manufacturing. With manufacturing, it's kind of a no-brainer because if somebody, let's say a manufacturer, goes through this exhaustive study to find a good location for a factory based upon transportation, available labor, low energy costs, maybe good taxes, low taxes, that would often make pretty good sense to other companies. So they've already kind of done the homework, and oh, by the way, they usually aren't too upset if you want to locate right next to them because you're not selling from the factory directly. Normally any product would go off to a retail outlet. So even though you're a direct competitor, you're not in competition at that facility. The only caveat with all this is if there's a tight labor market, you can cause some problems if you end up with some sort of scarcity in labor, and then prices for labor, wages start going up dramatically. But right now, obviously, since minimum wage is such a big deal in the United States, that's evidence that there is no pressure on wages, that labor is certainly abundant. So we mentioned fast food. General aviation, we kind of lost that industry in the U.S., but anyway, when we did have it, that was down in Wichita. Some other niche things, orthopedic design. So anyway, you'll see it in your own lives a little bit about clustering. Now, certain organizations or companies do not want to cluster. Grocery stores in particular. If you've got a grocery store, you generally don't want somebody else right next door. So that makes a difference. But other retail outlets, like let's say there's you've got some sort of specialty store like a wedding boutique type thing, sell wedding dresses, and let's say a town of Anchorage's size could support 4 of them. If 3 of them were together, they're probably going to do better because people will go there to comparison shop. And let's say there's one that's isolated off in the distance, they're probably going to suffer, even though they don't have any competitors right in the area. They're going to be the out of the way one. So clustering, again, it's a strategy that sometimes makes sense, sometimes doesn't. But you see companies certainly employ it. Factor rating method. There will be a factor rating method question on the homework, so you'll get a bit of a explanation of it. But factor rating method is a great tool to use for any sort of proposal. Anytime you have to explain something and you're looking for some guidance. Develop a list of factors, assign a weight, scale, score each location. So we'll look at an example here. It'll all make a lot more sense. So here they're trying to look at 2 locations. They've got France and Denmark. And what they've done is they've decided, what's important. Labor, people-to-car ratio, per capita income, tax structure. And then they assign different weights. One of the confusing things is they assign 39.39, which is the highest weight, to tax structure, and they're looking at pretty high tax countries. So you would think that they might have gone somewhere else. But anyway, France and Denmark. So based upon, let's stick with tax structure, they're saying France gets a 75, Denmark gets a 70. Okay, and then you would multiply the weight factor times their score. And so France ends up with a 29.3 in that category, and Denmark only gets a 27. Denmark is incredibly, it's great if you're living there, if you got a bunch of kids, free medical care, free college for everybody, all the rest of that. But yeah, the tax burden's kind of high. But anyway, you look at the different options, and you do all that multiplication across, and then you total it, and in this case, France comes out on top. So the important thing about this is, yeah, it's all subjective. You come up with a score, and you may even back the numbers in to fudge it and get the choice that you want to win. But if you're reviewing this with somebody and they don't agree with your choice, using a tool like this gives you the opportunity to figure out, what part of it they don't agree with, so that you have some guidance. Because obviously, they're going to want you to go back and rework your numbers, rework your proposal, and so it helps to have something to start from, get some input from them. Location break-even analysis. So determine fixed and variable costs, plot the cost for each location, select location with lowest total cost. So these are, again, another location strategy. This is fairly realistic. You're selling a unit for 120, expected volume 200 or 2,000 units. In Akron, kind of out there, maybe a bit depressed, so fixed costs are pretty cheap, only $30,000. Where Chicago, big city, $110,000 in fixed costs. Real estate's more expensive, probably a big consideration. But the variable costs are cheap in Chicago. You might have some sort of, be close to the market, lower shipping, other things that are variable costs. And so by doing the math across, you'd come up with different numbers based upon that certain volume. Well, as that volume changes, the locations will also change. So if you're doing low production, Akron, which has got the low fixed cost, is going to be the best location. Middle production, 1,000 to 2,500, Bowling Green. And then when you get up into high production, Chicago, even though it had very high fixed cost, you're doing so many units that low variable cost carries some weight. So if you've got that situation, that's one way to do it. Now the center of gravity method, I'll tell you right up, I'm just not a big fan of this because it doesn't take into account enough variables in transportation. I'll show you. So finds the location that minimizes distribution costs, location of markets, volume of goods, shipping costs. So that all seems to make sense. But what they do is they basically come up with an XY, whatever, a graphing type solution, and they're going to plot out the markets and then put the manufacturing facility in the center. So they're going to do the summation, they're going to put everything out on coordinates. And so here's what it looks like. Chicago's over here, Atlanta's down here, Pittsburgh and New York. So they're going to do that math and they're going to come up with, hey, the manufacturing facility should be right here. But my problem with this is if you do that and you pretend that, for example, if you're out here in, what would that be? Probably up in Kentucky. You can drive from Kentucky to Atlanta in almost no time, but getting through Pittsburgh up to New York, Chicago's not too bad. But anyway, some of these, again, it sounds like I hate the Northeast, but in terms of traffic, in terms of trying to move goods and services, it is going to be a problem. So that's one of the problems with the center of gravity method. But anyway, from their model, they're going to come up with a location, just like I said, the center of gravity. And I don't see it as being that useful, that calculation. Transportation model. Okay, so now we're going to get into linear programming, and we're going to look at more factors. So just as in forecasting, the simple solutions, end up yielding quick results, but a lot of times, if you use more factors in a linear program solution, you can get a far better answer. Obviously, Volkswagen, where you've got things going intermodal, international, you've got marine freight, the whole bit, rail transportation. It's going to be much more involved, and it's going to need a more complex model to come up with the answers. two big things you're going to take off. Let me back up one. Off of location strategy is service, retail, professional are going to be revenue focused, right? Goods producing, cost focused. So, the understanding is in service and retail, if you've got the money in the area, it's going to outweigh the cost. Say for example, if you're paying high rent in a mall, that's because that mall's pretty productive. And by the way, your rent is probably some proportion of your sales. So, you're happy to pay higher rent because that means your sales are quite high. But you're concerned with parking, security, other things. In goods producing, manufacturing, it's all about costs. Transportation costs, whether unions are a big deal, education expenditures. Now we're getting into, obviously this is the intangible, but up here at the top, it's all cost focused. Where'd the arrow go? So, regression models, factor rating, but you can use factor rating over here as well. Traffic counts, geographic information systems. The geographic information systems model they're going to show you on the video. My apologies, some of those videos that the authors aren't updating quite as quickly as they could. I mean, these slides, some of them are from 2011, but the 2014 they're just reprints. So, or not 14, but 12 or some other slides. But the graphics are the same, the whole bit. So, hopefully this summer they'll come up with something new. Locations and major determinant of revenue. Costs are relatively constant for a given area, therefore revenue critical. And then location. Everything's about cost. This example I talked about, La Quinta, perhaps a college, and this was what I was talking about, something that's, what's a college got to do with determining a hotel location? Well, if you can stumble upon something that is a good indicator, and a college obviously would show a pretty good spread of folks, usually a fairly affluent area, young people, faculty that are probably, getting paid decent, support staff, the rest of it. Anyway, by using that factor, they can come up with a decent location. So that's not going to work in every occasion, but that's one of the factors that they state that they use. Call center. Now you're seeing call center, many of the call centers have gotten kind of a bad rep. And now, due to incredibly cheap, telecommunications charges, they can be located anywhere in the world, but they are starting to gravitate back to the Midwest, where folks tend to appear to be a little friendlier, a little less rushed on the phone. Graphic information systems, so geographic information systems. The stuff they show you, at least initially, is pretty primitive. Google and everybody else have moved way beyond that sort of the Windows 3.1 kind of technology they're showing you. But in terms of service and retail, and figuring out who's got the buying power, and it's not just money. There's it's people that are willing to part with their money, or the folks that you're after. So that was a little about location decisions. Again, there's a couple videos out there to support it, the FedEx one, and then also the textbook video of Hard Rock. Now, layout strategies, the big thing about layout strategies is there's not a best layout strategy. There probably is a best layout strategy for a given product, and that's the thing. You have to identify what the best layout strategy is for your given product that you're trying to create. So, and this could apply to an office, a service, retail, manufacturing. So, higher utilization of space and equipment, improved flow, morale, safer work conditions. So again, it's such a broad area that you know, office, retail, warehouse, storage. So very, very different needs. And even in the realm of retail, we've got those videos on the supermarket type thing, but stores will set up their servicescape. Servicescape refers to how a store tries to convey a message. You go down to, say, like an Abercrombie and Fitch, and there's sort of a dim lighting and music and pictures on the wall. Anyway, it's meant to repel certain folks, probably like me, and draw in much younger folks. And then you go to an Apple store, and there's a certain look that has, or a Costco or a Sam's Club has got this sort of warehouse look to, make you feel as you're getting a great deal. Often the prices aren't much different, but you feel like you're in a warehouse, and this has got to be the cheapest price. So anyway, that whole ambiance that they're trying to set up there, that's referred to as a servicescape. Some of the process strategies we talked about too, they will have their own unique layout strategies that go with them. So job shops, work cells, and then repetitive, like an assembly line, product oriented. Obviously, if you're going to be running forklifts around, material handling equipment, there's going to be unique considerations, space requirements, flow of information, especially in an office type thing, and cost of moving between various areas. Again, when you get into the quality aspects of it, things should be fairly compact to minimize movement in the manufacturing sense. Office layout, there's a lot of politics involved here, but there's certain attributes, depending on what the staff is doing in terms of how they should be configured. Having people who need to communicate, across the office means that you want some sort of open office format, whereas somebody doing some, sort of technical accounting work probably would be more efficient in a closed environment. Supermarket retail layout, so just like they talk about in the videos, it's maximum exposure and to get you to purchase. So, a couple key things you'll see in those videos that are very much the same as here in the United States is, the notion of the end cap, that end portion of the aisle, is very important, and people pay for that. There's also a slotting fee that's paid even to get goods into a store. One of the bigger stores, like say a Walmart, or probably Cars, but Cars might have, say, more of a variety, but a Walmart type store, to get in the door, a manufacturer may have to pay a fairly substantial fee. And the big manufacturers, the Frito-Lay, those kind of folks, they're happy to pay it because they know the small guy can't, and it keeps the competition out of there. And Walmart it's probably simpler to go with fewer product lines. So, but anyway, it's all about maximizing exposure and revenue per square foot. This thing about the beer and diapers, you can read more about it, but it's kind of interesting. They talked about, young men going from a lifestyle where they're out running around the bars to being married, and if they're running around late at night, they're probably out getting diapers, and so having beer next to it. So, two different theories on that. I put the sources in there. You can read that if you like, but it's not very scientific. Helpful ideas for supermarket layout. So high draw items are on the periphery of the store to make sure you have to go across prominent locations. So again, by the checkout stands, that'll work. End aisle locations, the end caps there. Power items, store mission. Something interesting that you'll see too, and they bring this up in the video, are items that are going to take a lot of time like say baby food, vitamins, things that people are going to look at and examine. You don't want that in a high traffic area. You want, that buried down in the middle of the aisles, so that when people are down there trying to make their decision, they're not blocking the rest of the store. So part of it has to do just with traffic flow. Here's how things are set up typically. But you would have, the bakery and the produce and all those type of things. You want that to, convey the message of the store that, things are fresh and wholesome, and you'll tend to bury all the packaged stuff more or less in the center. But you want that image to be conveyed of fresh and wholesomeness the minute somebody walks through the front door. Retail slotting, which I talked about. So these fees can be pretty high. Again, it depends whether you're talking about an individual location or for the whole chain, but we're talking, tens of thousands per store or millions of dollars across the entire enterprise. So servicescapes, I touched on this before. So, it depends what they're selling, what they're the sounds, the smells, everything within the store that's going to make you come back, or at least convey the message that they want to send against their demographic that they're after. Warehousing, storage layouts. So here, we're sort of stepping away from service and retail. We're more into manufacturing, warehousing, and all that. And so it's all about cost. You can see the word cost is, 3-4 times in here. So it's about cubing out this warehouse. How do you, fill a warehouse to capacity is not, we talk about random stocking. Random stocking is not necessarily random. Random stocking only appears random to a human who's just taking a snapshot of it. The person who, the human who actually programmed it and set up the algorithms on how this warehouse is going to be stocked, it's anything but random. It is very, very organized. And so based upon volume, based upon expiration dates, based upon a whole bunch of factors, will decide how that warehouse is going to be filled. And so random stocking is used with automated equipment, because for a computer to remember where a certain item is stocked is very easy. For a forklift driver to look at this what looks like complete chaos in terms of the warehouse layout would slow things down. So we'll look at a little bit more like that. The material handling costs, again, they can be pretty significant, especially the storage, finding moving material, and minimizing damage and spoilage. All of these costs sort of drive major operators to an automated solution, kind of like what we saw with the Amazon video, where they've got those Kiva robots that are going around, and this has all been factored. With conventional, semi-conventional forklifts that are automated, again, same concept, but they're just going on some sort of track. A couple of these high-tech garage examples. You can go on YouTube. YouTube's full of them, but it's not that unique. I mean, it's just the same as a warehouse that's automatically stocked. Improved warehouse productivity by an estimated 500%. Even if they're wrong by a factor of 5, I mean, it's still 100% improvement. So you can see that it's well worth the investment to establish these systems. Cross-docking. Remember when I referred to what's going on when FedEx, when the jets, say a jet comes from the East Coast and lands in Memphis, and a jet from the West Coast lands in Memphis, essentially the products or the packages that are going to those other locations will be switched. And so in the FedEx example, it'd be the same concept, but obviously there'd be a lot more loading docks in the example. But you need the technology so that this can be efficiently done. You need to know what's incoming before it actually arrives. So they're going to go through a little bit more of a definition of the random stocking that I was attempting to explain before. Automatic identification system is going to be paramount. Random assignments, but again, I would argue that they're not so random. They're actually pretty logical. So the computer can do all these things, open locations, accurate records, sequence items, pick times, combine picking orders. A person, is going to get task saturated pretty quickly, but a computer, those are the sort of tasks that it thrives on. Fixed position layout. So moving on back to layout strategies. Certain times, building a big ship, doing something like that. Yeah, you can't move that item. The workers have to come to it, and in this case, a critical patient, same sort of thing. Workers and equipment come to the site. Process-oriented, the kind of work cell type thing. Wide variety of projects. Scheduling can be difficult because, again, just due to the variety. It's not a product type focus. It's not an assembly line. It's more of a job shop that focuses on one item at a time. One of the ways to work around this, again, would be the central nurse station with the rooms out there to the side, so you could minimize the number of steps that you would have to take to give that specialized care. Process-oriented. So process-oriented work center so as to minimize cost, number of loads, distance of load. So again, if you can minimize just a few steps, we'll show in subsequent lectures, we'll talk about the Toyota production system, which is just, a quality production system, and they intentionally build their factory sites pretty small. Number one, because they don't want people inventorying items. They don't want people rat-holing product and stuff around the facility when they're trying to do just-in-time operations. And then also they want to minimize the time and movement across the facility. Work cells. Yep, group technology. If you're going to set up a work cell for, say, welding or something like that, yeah, you have to do a substantial amount of it to justify the use of it and the dedication of resources. But you might have, say, a wood production work cell and a welding work cell, depending on what you're manufacturing. So you can see just a simple thing like getting rid of the straight line and going to a U-shape type format provides more interaction. It's much easier for employees to, say, come to the aid of one another because they can, go to the most urgent tasks. So even in this example, I don't know if it's intentional, but they have, 4 employees on the straight line, and they're getting by with 3 employees on the U-shape line. Focused work center. So production from a general process-oriented facility to a larger work cell. So again, not a whole lot different than a work cell, but just bigger. And then a focused factory, back in the day. And I think the car companies still do it to a certain extent, where you have engine plants and transmission plants, and they're automobile factories, but they're focused on a specific item. And then you have other factories that are assembly factories that put all those pieces and parts together. So a bit more of the details on each one of those: work cell, focus work center, and then focus factory. Repetitive and product oriented, so high volume, low variety. So, beer, potato chips, something like that. Huge volume, high equipment utilization. Every piece of equipment that's in there is going to be working. It's not like some hospital where you have some special equipment that's only needed, once or twice a year. The stuff that's in a product factory will if it's there, it's working pretty much full time. Product standardized, raw materials, adequate, uniform quality. So anyway, it's all about achieving the flow through that facility to get the cost down and also keep the uniformity up. Product-oriented layouts, so fabrication lines and then assembly lines. The notion of balancing they talk about down there, balancing just means that, well, they say it pretty well, time to perform the work at each station is the same. So you don't have a task that takes, 2 or 3 minutes when every other step in that assembly line is 30 seconds, because you can quickly see that a bottleneck's going to develop. So you would either split that into 2 stations, or you would break up that task itself, but again, you would get that assembly line balanced. Product-oriented layouts, so the low cost per unit, easier to train and supervise, rapid throughput. Disadvantages, you do need that high volume, and work stoppage is going to be a problem because you've just got a single line with a single product normally. The balancing, believe it or not, these aircraft in a facility like this are actually on a track. They may only be moving, a few inches per hour, but they are coming on down the line in succession. So, and again, it would be poor form if this line is not balanced and you have everybody working bunched up at a certain process. Those tasks should be split up, and that line should maintain its normal pace. And then disassembly line. More prevalent now, but again, it's for, sort of demanufacturing things, putting it back and recycling and getting products moving along. A lot of it's mandated, but a lot of it's just common sense. But again, in terms of an industry, 16th largest industry in the world for just automotive products. Okay, so as I said, the homework, I put it all in one sheet here for you. And again, I'm trying to make this as easy as possible. You've got 3 places to find it. So it's attached to these slides here. It's a standalone item in the materials section. And then it's also, if you actually go to the point where you're going to turn it in for your assignment, you'll see it all repeated right there. So I think this should be fairly easy. You need to turn it in before you start the exam. Other than that, why might you find beer and dope? Yeah, we sort of talked about this. But again, see if you think there's any other examples. This doesn't apply in Alaska, as you know, since you can't sell those at within the same building, I guess, but same register. So that's not going to happen here. But you go to a place, say, down in the Midwest, or certainly in California or something, where they've got beer right there in the middle of the store. They claim that can happen. So, any questions? Let me look back again at the chat, make sure I didn't miss anything. I think the only chat was way back for when I was going through the test. People were getting frustrated. If you do have any questions on the test, or if you feel there are any questions that weren't fair, send me an email, and we'll move on. The videos themselves, you'll watch a little bit of it. You'll get kind of an idea. The supermarket ones are kind of interesting. In the FedEx one, after 30, 40 seconds. Either the music will kill you, or you'll figure out what the program is. And then the hard rock one, take out of that what you can. The big boys, in terms of some of the big retail players, they put a lot of time and effort into it, and there's a lot of local knowledge that sometimes escapes them. I was kind of shocked when I saw that big Bass Pro, I guess their outpost, go in at that location in Mountain View. That seemed like that location hadn't been working for anybody, but obviously it's working. Is somebody writing on that? Is that working? I'm seeing some lines on there. Musel. Anyway, pretty cool. More technology than I do, if you can figure that out. But yeah, the yellow writing up there at the top. All right. Well, I'll talk to you again next week. Let me know if you have any questions.
Recording stopped.